My name is Ethan, and I am 35 years old. To the outside world, I live a quiet, successful life. I'm a lead software architect at a company that respects my work. I own my own home, and I have cultivated a life of peace and order. But that peace was earned, forged in the fires of a family dynamic that nearly consumed me whole. This isn't a story about a simple disagreement. It's a story about the suffocating weight of a legacy that wasn't mine to carry, about the transactional nature of a love I desperately craved, and about a single, irreversible decision I made about my own body that forced a decades-old truth into the light. It all began, as most family tragedies do, with a death. The death of my perfect, older brother, Aaron. In my family, there were two sons, but only one son, and Aaron was the son. Everything and everyone orbited him. He was brilliant, charismatic, and destined for greatness from the moment he was born. He was going to be Dr. Aaron, the celebrated surgeon. Our parents, Richard and Helen, weren't just his supporters, they were the architects of his destiny. Their pride in him wasn't just love, it was an investment, a reflection of their own success. I, on the other hand, was the moon, quiet, orbiting at a distance. My light was merely a pale reflection of his. I remember my college graduation with perfect clarity. I had finished top of my class, summa cum laude, in computer science. At the celebratory dinner, my father raised a glass. To Ethan, he said, a polite smile on his face. We're proud of your hard work. The toast lasted less than a minute. Then, for the next 2 hours, the entire conversation was about Aaron's recent acceptance into a prestigious medical school. My achievement was a footnote in the grand novel of his life. I didn't mind. Or rather, I had taught myself not to mind. For years, I had learned that in our family, silence was the easiest way to avoid making things worse. This dynamic continued into our adulthood. When I saved up and made the down payment on my first house, a modest but proud accomplishment built on my own salary, my mother's reaction was lukewarm. It's lovely, dear, she said over the phone. Aaron is looking at a beautiful colonial near the hospital. Once he's an attending surgeon, he'll need the space for his family. The comparison was always there. A constant, unspoken reminder of my place. I was the reliable one, the stable one, but he was the star. Then, at 37, the sun set. A sudden, aggressive illness took Aaron from us in a matter of months. The grief was an ocean, vast and suffocating. Our family shattered. At the funeral, I stood beside my parents, a silent pillar of support as they accepted condolences. People would hug them, weeping for their loss. Their terrible, unspeakable loss of such a brilliant young man. They would pat my shoulder, offer a sad smile, and then turn back to my parents, the true epicenters of the tragedy. It was as if my own grief, my own loss of a brother, was secondary. In that moment, I wasn't a son who had lost his only sibling. I was merely a placeholder for the son they had truly lost. A few weeks after the funeral, the house was still thick with a heavy, oppressive silence. I was helping my mother sort through some of Aaron's old photos when I overheard her on the phone with a friend. Her voice, a low, determined whisper. We won't let his legacy end like this, she said. Her back to me. We already have a plan. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. I didn't understand what she meant, but the tone of her voice sounded less like a grieving mother and more like a CEO discussing a corporate merger. Later that evening, the plan was revealed. My parents called me into the living room. The air was formal, sterile. My father, a retired lawyer who always spoke as if he were addressing a courtroom, cleared his throat. My mother sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression a mask of solemn duty. Ethan, my father began, his voice leaving no room for discussion. Your brother's death was a tragedy of immense proportions, but the family line, the legacy of this family, must continue. He paused, looking at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Your duty now is to have a son. We need you to give us a grandson, so we can raise him in Aaron's memory. The silence that followed my father's declaration was so absolute, it felt like a physical weight. I stared at them, trying to process the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the command. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a directive, delivered with the cold finality of a judge's sentence. They wanted me to father a child, not out of a desire for a grandchild to love, but to create a replacement, a living monument to their fallen son. My role in this was purely functional. I was the vessel, and the means to an end. I tried, Foolishly. To reason with them. To appeal to the part of them that might still see me as a person. Not a tool. I can't replace Aaron. I said. My voice barely a whisper. No one can. A child wouldn't be him. My mother's composure finally broke. Her face, which had been a mask of stoic grief, crumpled into a caricature of manipulative sorrow. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned forward, her voice trembling with accusation. So that's it. Then, you're just going to let his name, everything he worked for, turn to dust. After all we've done for you, how can you be so selfish? The word selfish hung in the air. A familiar weapon in her arsenal. It was the word used whenever I had dared to have a dream that didn't align with their grand plan for Aaron. It was the word that had kept me in my place for over 3 decades. My father took a different approach. He saw the flicker of defiance in my eyes and switched from emotional blackmail to financial coercion. Ethan. We understand this is a difficult thing to ask, he said, his tone softening into one of a patronizing negotiator. But you need to understand what's at stake. We established the Aaron Legacy Trust years ago. It's worth over $2 million. It was meant for his children. If you have a son, we can ensure that his future is secure. We can make sure that fund is properly redirected. They were trying to buy my body. They were putting a price tag on my future. On the life of an unborn child who would be born into the world, not as an individual, but as a ghost. I listened to it all. The tears. The threats. The bribes. I let the full, monstrous weight of their expectations wash over me. For the first time in my life, something inside me didn't flinch. It didn't cower or seek to appease. It hardened into something cold, quiet, and unbreakable. I looked from my mother's tear-streaked face to my father's calculating eyes. I let the silence stretch, letting them believe their tactics were working. I saw a flicker of triumph in my father's expression. He thought he had won. Finally. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I understand, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I understand what you want. They both relaxed slightly, mistaking my acknowledgement for agreement. But I wasn't finished. I held their gaze. And for the first time, I didn't look away. But there's a small complication. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. A hook baited with their own arrogance. I had a vasectomy last week. The transformation of their faces was a slow-motion car crash. First came confusion. A slight furrowing of their brows as they tried to parse the words. Then came dawning comprehension. Their eyes widening in disbelief. And finally, a wave of pure, unadulterated fury that was so intense, it seemed to suck the very air from the room. The mask of the grieving parents was gone, replaced by the snarling faces of thwarted tyrants. The silence that followed was no longer heavy, it was explosive. A prelude to a war I had just single-handedly declared. The explosion was everything I had anticipated, and more. The room, once a shrine to quiet grief, became a theater of rage. My mother's sorrow evaporated, replaced by shrieking accusations. My father, the calm and collected lawyer, paced the floor like a caged animal, his face a mottled shade of red. They called me a traitor, a monster, a disappointment. They accused me of desecrating my brother's memory out of petty jealousy. I stood my ground, weathering the storm of their words. Because for the first time, their insults had no power over me. They were no longer attacking a son desperate for their approval. They were attacking a stranger. But in the midst of her tirade, my mother let something slip. It was a single, frantic sentence, screamed in a moment of pure, unfiltered rage. You've ruined everything. The entire estate plan was built around this. It's all going to be lost now. The rest of her words faded into white noise. The phrase, estate plan, echoed in my mind. Not our hopes. Not our dreams. But a cold, legal term. It was a mistake. A crack in their facade that revealed the machinery whirring just beneath the surface of their grief. Their plan wasn't just an emotional whim, it was a calculated, financial strategy. The $2 million trust was only a part of it. A much bigger game was being played. And I had just inadvertently kicked over the board. In the days that followed, I enacted my own plan. I pretended to crumble. I sent them a single, short text message, I need some time to think. Then, I went completely silent. I didn't answer their calls, which quickly went from furious to manipulative, and then to suspiciously conciliatory. I let them believe I was wrestling with guilt, that their pressure was working, and that I was on the verge of breaking. I wanted them to lower their guard. I needed them to believe they were still in control. Behind this wall of silence, I began to dig. My first step was to find the one person who might have seen behind the curtain of my family's perfect image. Clara. Aaron's ex-fiancée. They had broken up about a year before he got sick. A split that my parents had always blamed on her. Calling her uncommitted and not ready for the seriousness of a life with Aaron. I suspected the truth was far more complicated. It took me less than an hour to find her online. A few clicks. A deep breath. And a cautiously worded message later. We were on the phone. Her voice was hesitant at first. But when I told her what my parents had demanded of me, the hesitation vanished. Replaced by a sigh of weary recognition. Oh. Ethan. I am so sorry. She said. And the genuine empathy in her voice was something I hadn't realized I was starving for. That was their obsession from the start. A timeline for children was the first thing they wanted to discuss after we got engaged. It wasn't about us. Or our happiness. It was about securing the next generation of their legacy. She confirmed my darkest suspicions. But then, she gave me something I never could have imagined. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. He couldn't stand it either. Ethan. The pressure was suffocating him. He told me he was trying to find a way out. She paused. He had his own lawyer. A woman, he found himself. Separate from your father's firm. He was trying to get his affairs in order. To build a life that was truly his own. He never got the chance. And then she delivered the words that changed everything. I think he had his own will drawn up. He never wanted them to have the final say. Clara's words were a key. Unlocking a door I never knew existed. A separate will. A separate lawyer. It was a lifeline. A whisper from the past. A final act of rebellion from a brother I had only ever known as the perfect compliance. It was proof that beneath the surface, he had been drowning. Just as I had been. And in his final months, he had been fighting back. Clara gave me the lawyer's name. A woman named Ms. Albright, whose office was in a different city. Far from the reach of my father's professional network. Finding her was the easy part. Convincing her to speak to me was the challenge. When I first called, her response was professionally courteous but firm. She could not discuss the affairs of a former client. Not even with his brother. I knew a phone call wouldn't be enough. I needed to show her that I wasn't an opportunist. I was an executor of my brother's true wishes. Before our call ended, Clara had emailed me something she had kept, a handwritten letter from Aaron. Sent to her just after their breakup. It was full of sorrow and regret. But one paragraph stood out. He wrote, "The hardest part is knowing that they will never understand. They see me as a title. A legacy. Ethan is the only one who just sees me as a brother. He's the lucky one. He got away." I booked a flight the next day. I sat in Miss Albright's quiet, sunlit office and slid the letter across her polished mahogany desk. She read it slowly. Her expression, unreadable. She read it a second time. Then, she looked up at me. And I saw a shift in her eyes, a flicker of understanding. Of trust. "Your brother was a remarkable man," she said softly. "He was under an immense amount of pressure. He came to me because he wanted to ensure that his life's work and his personal assets would reflect his own values, not just his family's ambitions." She turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "He was very specific. He knew that any written will could be contested by your father. He knew his mental state would be questioned. So he prepared for it." She swiveled the large monitor on her desk to face me. "He didn't just leave a document. Ethan." She clicked a file. And suddenly, there was Aaron. He was thinner. Paler than I had ever seen him. Sitting in what looked like a hospital room. But his eyes were clear. His gaze direct and steady as he looked into the camera. He looked right at me. And then, he began to speak. "Ethan," he said. His voice weak but unwavering. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And it means they've already started. I know they have." Ms. Albright's office was completely silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the computer, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I sat there, frozen, watching the ghost of my brother speak from beyond the grave. My secret weapon wasn't just a piece of paper. It was Aaron himself. The tears that streamed down my face weren't just for the brother I had lost, but for the one I was just now, finally, getting to know. And in that moment, my quiet determination hardened into something else entirely. It became an unshakable resolve to see his final wish fulfilled. No matter the cost. Armed with the undeniable truth of Aaron's last wishes, I returned home. The time for silent defense was over. It was time to make the first move. Through Ms. Albright, I sent a single, formal letter to my parents' estate lawyer. The letter was simple and direct. It stated that, as a primary beneficiary and named executor in a newly discovered last will and testament of Aaron, I was requesting a full and complete accounting of all assets, trusts, and properties held in his name. The effect was instantaneous. It was like dropping a boulder into a placid pond. Within hours, my phone began to ring incessantly. It was my father. Then my mother. Then my father again. I didn't answer. Instead, I let Ms. Albright handle it. She was my firewall. Her message to them was as cold and professional as the initial letter. All future communication regarding this matter was to be directed through her office. I had removed myself from the emotional equation, transforming a family drama into a legal proceeding. Their panic was palpable. They had lost control of the narrative. They tried to regain it by turning to their traditional allies, the extended family. My mother launched a campaign of misinformation, calling aunts, uncles, and cousins. Her story was a masterpiece of victimhood. She wept, telling them that her grieving heart was being broken all over again by her cruel, greedy younger son. She claimed I was trying to steal my dead brother's money, that I was trying to erase his memory for my own selfish gain. For a few days, it worked. I received confused, disappointed text messages from relatives, urging me to do the right thing and respect your parents' wishes. They saw a grieving mother and a cold distance. They didn't see the truth. But my parents, blinded by their arrogance and desperation, made a critical mistake. My father, believing his legal background made him invincible, decided to escalate. He instructed his lawyer to file a formal motion in probate court. The motion sought to invalidate any and all other wills, claiming that Aaron, in his final months, was not of sound mind and was likely under undue influence when he created the document. Ms. Albright held he was, in effect, suing his own deceased son, declaring him mentally incompetent. It was a breathtakingly stupid move. It was the act of a man who believed he could bully the legal system just as he had bullied his family for decades. I received a copy of the filing from Ms. Albright. As I read the clinical, cruel language used to describe my brother's final days, I felt a surge of cold fury. My father had no idea what he had just done. He thought he was launching an attack. But all he had done was build the stage. He had turned a private family matter into a public legal battle, a forum where feelings and manipulations were irrelevant. And only one thing mattered: evidence. And I was holding the ultimate piece of it. His arrogant move wasn't an attack, it was an invitation. An invitation to present Aaron's final, undeniable testimony to the world. My father's legal maneuver was intended to intimidate me into submission, to bury me under a mountain of paperwork and legal fees. But it had the opposite effect. It broadcasted his cruelty to everyone who had previously been on the fence. The news of the court filing began to ripple through our extended family. Suing your own dead son was a line that, for many, could not be crossed. The first crack in my parents' wall of support came from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She was a quiet, sensible woman who had always been kind to me. She called me, her voice filled with a hesitant concern. "Ethan," she said, "your mother told me what you were doing. And I was so disappointed. But then I heard about the lawsuit. Your father is saying Aaron was unstable. That doesn't sound like the nephew I knew." I didn't argue or try to convince her. I simply said, "Aunt Carol, I can't discuss the details. But I promise you, I am only trying to honor what Aaron truly wanted." Then, with Ms. Albright's permission, I forwarded her a single, redacted document, the first page of the letter Aaron had written to Clara, where he spoke of the pressure he was under. I didn't need to send the whole thing. Just that one paragraph was enough. The next time she spoke to my mother, the conversation was very different. "Helen," she told her, "I read what Aaron wrote. I think you need to stop this. You need to stop this now, before you destroy what's left of your family." The second, more devastating blow to my parents' narrative came from Clara, when she heard that they were officially, legally claiming Aaron was mentally incompetent. Something inside her snapped. The quiet grief she had held onto for years turned into a righteous anger. She called Ms. Albright immediately. "I will not let them slander his memory like this," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." She provided Ms. Albright with a sworn affidavit. It was a detailed, chronological account of the last 2 years of her relationship with Aaron. It included dates, specific conversations, and direct quotes. She described their constant pressure about having children, their dismissal of her career, and their attempts to control every aspect of their lives. More importantly, she attached emails. Emails from my mother outlining a 10-year family plan. Emails from my father discussing the financial incentives of an early marriage and grandchild. It was a meticulous, undeniable record of their long-term campaign of manipulation. It painted a picture not of loving parents, but of obsessive puppet masters. When Ms. Albright forwarded a copy of the affidavit to my father's lawyer, it was a declaration of war. Their entire legal strategy, which rested on the image of two heartbroken parents trying to protect their son's legacy from a greedy brother, was instantly annihilated. The affidavit proved that the only people who had ever exerted undue influence on Aaron were my parents themselves. They were no longer the victims. They were the villains. And now, there was a paper trail to prove it. They were completely and utterly alone. With their legal case in shambles and their family support crumbling, my parents were cornered. It was then that Ms. Albright proposed a final, off-the-record settlement meeting. She presented it to their lawyer as an opportunity to resolve this matter with dignity, before more private family details become public record in court. It was a final, merciful off-ramp. My parents, seeing a sliver of a chance to regain some control, or perhaps just to avoid further humiliation, agreed. The meeting took place in a sterile, impersonal conference room at a neutral law firm. The air was thick with tension. My parents sat on one side of the long, polished table, their lawyer between them. They looked smaller, older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive anger. I sat opposite them, with Ms. Albright by my side. My father's lawyer began with a weak, prepared statement about finding a mutually agreeable path forward. Ms. Albright let him finish. Then, she calmly slid a single document across the table. It was a summary of Aaron's true last will and testament. As you can see, she said, her voice even and clear, Mr. Aaron's wishes are explicit. 100% of his personal assets, a portfolio valued at just over $3.4 million, are to be used to establish the Dr. Aaron Memorial Scholarship Fund, providing full tuition for underprivileged medical students from your hometown. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. My father's face went pale. They had no idea Aaron had accumulated that much wealth on his own, through savvy investments. They had been fighting over their $2 million trust, completely unaware of the larger fortune that Aaron had purposefully kept hidden from them. This is absurd, my mother finally sputtered, her voice shaking with rage. He would never want that. We know our son. We are his parents. We just want to honor him. I had remained silent the entire time. But now, I leaned forward. I looked directly at my mother, at the woman who had screamed at me, manipulated me, and tried to turn my entire family against me. And I spoke. You're right, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the silent room. You do want to honor him. I looked at Ms. Albright and gave her a slight nod. So let's listen to him. Ms. Albright connected her laptop to the large monitor on the conference room wall. The screen flickered to life. And there he was. Aaron. Pale. Weary. But resoluta. He looked out from the screen, his gaze seeming to pierce through the years, right into the souls of our parents. And then, his voice filled the room. Ethan, he began, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And it means they've already started. He went on to describe the pressure, the suffocation, the desperate need for his life to mean something more than just their ambition. He ended by looking directly into the camera, a sad, knowing smile on his face. And so, to my parents, I say this. My legacy will not be a grandson forced into existence to replace me. My legacy will be the dozens of doctors who will go on to save lives. Doctors who might not have had a chance otherwise. That is my final word. That is my will. The video ended. The screen went black. But his voice remained, hanging in the air like a final judgment. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at the blank screen, his face ashen, utterly defeated. My mother had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs, not of grief for her lost son, but of devastation for her lost war. The game was over. Checkmate. In the aftermath, everything happened quietly. My parents withdrew their lawsuit the next day. They signed all the necessary paperwork to release Aaron's assets without another word. The $2 million legacy trust they had created remained untouched. A pointless, hollow monument to a future they had tried and failed to control. They sold the large family home, the one they had always envisioned, filled with the laughter of Aaron's children, and moved to a smaller condo in a different state. They had sought to preserve a legacy, and in the process, they had lost everything. I, on the other hand, got to work. With Ms. Albright's guidance, I established the Dr. Aaron Memorial Scholarship Fund. The process was healing. Every legal document I signed, every meeting I attended, it felt like a promise I was keeping to the brother I never truly knew. The first scholarships were awarded the following academic year to 3 bright, ambitious students who, without Aaron's help, would have never been able to afford medical school. Life moved on. I was promoted at my job. I started dating someone. A woman who valued my quiet nature and saw it not as a weakness, but as a strength. The hole in my life that my family had occupied for so long began to fill with peace, with genuine affection, with a quiet but profound happiness. I found that I no longer orbited anyone. I was my own center of gravity. About a year after the foundation was established, I received a letter in the mail. It was a simple white envelope with no return address, postmarked from the state where my parents now lived. My heart beat a little faster as I opened it. Inside, there was no letter. No note. It was just a newspaper clipping. A small article from a local paper in my hometown, with a headline that read, "Inaugural Dr. Aaron Scholarship recipients begin their journey." The article featured photos of the 3 smiling students. At the bottom of the clipping, there was a single, handwritten sentence in my father's unmistakable script. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was something far more complicated, and in its own way, far more meaningful. It simply said, "The one on the left reminds me of your brother." I read the sentence over and over. It was the closest my father would ever come to acknowledging the truth. An admission that Aaron's legacy was now thriving. In a way he had never imagined. In a way he had fought so hard to prevent. It was a concession. A final, quiet surrender. I folded the clipping carefully and placed it on my desk. I looked out the window of my home. At the rising sun of a new day. A day that was entirely my own. The wounds of the past may never fully disappear, but they no longer had the power to define my future. I was finally, completely, free. The story of Ethan and his family is a powerful and deeply moving account of a quiet war fought within the walls of a single home. It serves as a profound reminder that the true legacy of a person is not a name carved on a building or a bloodline forced to continue, but the positive impact they leave on the world, even after they are gone. This narrative demonstrates that love, which comes with conditions, expectations, and transactional demands, is not love at all, but a form of control. And sometimes, the most courageous act isn't to engage in a loud confrontation, but to make a quiet, definitive decision that reclaims your own life and your own future. We want to extend our deepest empathy to anyone who has ever felt like the shadow in their own family, who has been made to feel that their worth is measured only in comparison to someone else. If you have ever been pressured to live out another person's dream, please know that your life is your own. Setting boundaries to protect your mental health and your autonomy is not a selfish act. It is a fundamental act of self-respect. And it is a right you are entitled to. And that brings us to our final question for you. Where do you believe the line is between family responsibility and the non-negotiable duty to protect oneself? What would you do if you had to choose between keeping the peace with your loved ones and staying true to who you are? Please share your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Story 2. I was tricked by my parents into paying for an extravagant family vacation, to which I was never invited. I grinned as a result. Keep silent. And my subsequent actions. Everything was altered. I'm a 25-year-old man who, up until last year, believed I was doing rather well for myself. I had a small but cozy apartment, a respectable IT career, and I was managing my life on my own without any help. However, my parents were able to reintegrate me into their chaotic world in some way. All thanks to Mike, my older brother. Here's where I set the scene. Mike is still living at home at the age of 27. Since he was 17, he has been figuring things out. High school. He barely made it out of college. He has experienced 3. He was expelled from the first one for failing almost all of the classes save gym, due to disciplinary concerns. The second fired him. He claims that his innovative approach to deadlines was misunderstood by the teachers. Come on. Though, everyone knows that's a symptom of excessive partying and assignment neglect. I can't even recall his justification or the arrangement with the third one. Work. They're a joke. I see. Mike's employment history is essentially one of job changes. He was found giving his pals discounts when he was employed at an electronics store. After that, he attempted working as a barista, but gave up because the patrons were too picky. He most recently worked for 2 weeks at a gym before claiming that early shifts were detrimental to his way of life. And me. In the meanwhile, in order to graduate debt-free, I worked really hard throughout college, balancing part-time jobs and scholarships. I've managed to start saving money, have a reliable work, and pay my own expenses. However, it seems that being the responsible one does not translate into a pat on the back in my family. It indicates that they will contact you in the event of a necessity. My parents invited me to join them for Sunday supper last year. Not a huge deal. They frequently do it, while drinking his iced tea. My dad likes to question me about my future ambitions, while my mom creates this delicious lasagna. It's what they do. However, I could sense that something was different this time. Midway through our meal, Mom slaps me with Lucas. We've been thinking. Honey, wouldn't it be pleasant if you spent some time at home? On my garlic toast. I nearly choked. What? Why would I do that? In her most calming voice. She responded. Well, it just makes sense. Rent is a waste of money. And housing costs are out of control. You could save a lot of money for the future if you went back in time. Like he was privy to some brilliant scheme. Dad nodded. That's right. You're still young. Lucas. Now is the moment to manage your finances wisely. You would also be supporting the family. The guilt trip was there. My parents are experts in this field. Since I can remember. They have been using the Family Helps Family card. When Mike was a teenager, he crashed his father's car. Family supports family. Lucas. When Mike needed money for books, I discovered that he was using it to buy a gaming console. Lucas. Nevertheless, they presented it as very rational. Mom added that it could only be for a short time. Furthermore, it's not as though you wouldn't be making a modest contribution to cover groceries and rent. Much less than what you pay for your apartment. I didn't immediately say yes. I mean, I enjoyed living in my apartment. Yes. It was small. But it belonged to me. I'm not being pestered about the dishes in the sink. No arbitrary family drama. And definitely no Mike bumming around in his pajama pants at 2 in the afternoon. But I also couldn't deny they had a point. Rent was eating up a big chunk of my paycheck. And moving back home could give me a chance to save up. Just think about it. Mom said, flashing that hopeful smile she always uses when she wants me to agree to something. No rush. I spent the next few days mulling it over. On paper, it made sense. I could save money. Maybe even enough for a down payment on a house someday. And yeah, part of me thought it might be a chance to reconnect with my family. Things had been a little distant between us since I moved out. And maybe this could fix that. So after a lot of back and forth in my head, I called Mom and said I'd do it. She sounded thrilled. Oh, Lucas. You won't regret this. It'll be so nice to have the family together again. Looking back, that should have been my first red flag. She sounded way too excited about what was supposed to be me helping out the family. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured they were just happy to have me around again. I moved back in the next weekend. They gave me my old room, which hadn't changed much since high school. Same twin bed. Same posters on the wall. It was a little weird, but I told myself it was temporary. For the first few weeks, everything appeared okay. I paid a little rent payment, considerably less than what I'd been paying for my apartment, and helped out with food. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. I assured myself I'd made the correct decision. Mom would gush about how lovely it was to have me back. And Dad kept repeating things like, it's good for the family to keep together. Even Mike was unusually friendly at first, making jokes and really cleaning up after himself once or twice. But in hindsight, I should have known better. My folks are professionals at making everything appear good on the surface, while quietly manipulating the strings behind the scenes. And Mike, well, Mike's simply Mike. He's been riding the family gravy train for years. And I should have recognized that my homecoming was simply another stop on his continuous voyage. At the time, though, I was optimistic. I thought this may possibly work. I felt I was helping my family while benefiting myself. But as you probably expected, it didn't take long for things to start feeling weird. It started modest little things here and there. For example, Mike's room suddenly got a substantial improvement. One day, as I passed his door, I noticed him mounting a large flat-screen TV on his wall. A brand new gaming PC with one of those goofy light-up seats was on his desk. He simply shrugged when I asked him where he obtained the money for all of it. Without barely glancing up, he replied, I've been saving. What are you saving from? I wanted to inquire. But I decided not to. He may have saved money. There have been more bizarre incidents. Then there was the refrigerator issue. My groceries always seemed to vanish within 48 hours after my purchase. I would stock up on staples like bread, milk, eggs, and a few snacks. And the next day I would discover Mike devouring a sandwich the size of my head and half the bread had been consumed. Have you consumed all of the eggs? One morning, I asked him. Yes. He responded, idly browsing through his phone. I prepared an omelet. Or do you want me to pick up more? I was dumbfounded when I looked at him. The person was behaving as like, my question was a small annoyance. Even though he hadn't bought food in years. When I subsequently informed my mother about it, she only chuckled. He doesn't consider those things. Mike. You know. I will remind him. The deliveries followed. Mike seems to receive a delivery every other day. Clothes, shoes, and various devices. Clearly unnecessary items. He once received a huge package from a delivery man that was a brand new sound system. He was almost ecstatic as he set it up. Where is the source of all this money? Trying not to come across as very accusing, I asked. Oh, he answered hazily. Here and there. This presumably referred to my wallet since when I went grocery shopping the following time. My mother gave me her card and told me to use it for family expenses and to cover any leftover money. We'll reimburse you later. At first, I didn't give it much thought. It was one of those, I thought, deals like, we'll square it up later, never materialized. I had already spent hundreds of dollars on groceries before I learned she wasn't keeping count. Then there was the issue of rent. We had decided on a modest monthly payment when I initially returned. I hate to ask, but could you help a little more this month? Mom asked Lucas after 2 months. Right now. Things are tight. Sure, I said, assuming it would only happen once. However, it wasn't. When I mentioned it to my dad, the small extra became the new normal. And all of a sudden I was spending almost as much as I had for my apartment. It's only a temporary situation. Right now, you're in a better financial situation than we are, which benefits the family. The term good for the family was becoming monotonous. But it was more than simply the cash. It was the entire atmosphere. I became aware of how Mike was at the center of everything. If he needed to borrow the automobile, my parents went out of their way to fetch him everything he desired. No issue. Mom prepared snacks and instructed me to be accommodating with the noise level if he wanted to have friends over for a movie night. In the meantime, I received a passive-aggressive remark about how everyone had to help if I even left a plate in the sink. I once heard Mom boasting to her sister over the phone about Mike's finally getting his act together. She talked endlessly about his intentions to launch a company. Some hazy notion of making personalized shoes or something. As if my accomplishments were a footnote in the larger scheme of Mike's life. She remarked, Lucas is helping us keep things stable. That was it. Furious, I went upstairs, closed my door, and sat on my bed. How could I have allowed this to happen? Mike got to float through life like it was one huge vacation while I was working nonstop, paying for everything, and putting up with this bullshit. I began mentally reliving everything: Mike's new TV, the disappearance of food, the many deliveries, and the endless rent increases. Everything began to make sense. This has nothing to do with aiding the family. With Mike as the main character and me as the supporting one, this was about me supporting their way of life, preserving the lights. I made an effort to discuss it with my parents the next day. Look, I feel like I'm contributing a lot more than we originally agreed upon, I replied as I set them down. Is it possible for us to revisit our first discussion? Mom smiled at me, like she always does. We really appreciate what you're doing, Lucas simply said. Things are a little difficult at the moment, Dad said. You know how it is. It won't last forever. Only until we are able to stand again. They had a justification for everything. Always. Additionally, each time they brought it up, they painted me as the villain. I began to pay more attention to the way things were being handled after that conversation. I became aware of how frequently, when they believed I wasn't listening, Mom and Dad would whisper to one another. I noticed that Mike seemed to be constantly taking on new projects that needed funding from my parents. And I came to the conclusion that this was not going to stop. They had no intention of getting back on their feet. As long as I allowed it. They intended to continue to rely on me. However, I refused to let them. No more. One Friday night was the last straw. After another long, demanding work week. It was meant to be my time to relax. I was hoping for a peaceful evening where I could get some takeaway, watch something pointless, and rest. Of course. However, with my family, nothing is ever straightforward. The house was in disarray when I arrived. It looked like a frat party in the living room. The aftermath. Chip bags and empty Coke cans littered the area. And Mike's hyperactive dog, Max, was howling wildly at an unidentified sound outside. Mike's feet were up on the coffee table as he lay splayed out on the couch. Playing games as normal, I said. Hey. Hey. And left my suitcase at the door. Can you also tidy this up? This place is filthy. He hardly gave me a look. Yes. I will address it later. His eyes were fixed on the TV screen as he muttered. Not later. Louder this time, I said. Right now. The last thing I want to do after spending the entire day at work is return home to this mess. Oh. Man. Relax. He paused his game and stated that. Only a handful of cans. Why do you always act so stiff? I sensed my patient becoming tense. Mike. This goes beyond a few cans. You can't even clean up after yourself. And every single day I'm working my ass off while you sit around doing nothing. What's wrong with you? He sprang to his feet and fired back. She returned home. Not me. You weren't invited to be a housemaid. By now, We were shouting, and Max, obviously annoyed by the commotion, began to bark even louder. Are you serious now? I yelled. Additionally, I've been handling my bills, purchasing groceries, and paying my rent. And you believe I'm only playing the role of maid? You've been taking advantage of your parents for years. And now you're attempting to blame me. Mike waved me away while rolling his eyes. Oh. We're at it once more. Lucas. Always so responsible. Poor guy. Dude. You're not a saint. Leave if you don't like it. You are not being forced to stay. I wasn't prepared for how hard that hit. What do you know? Shaking my head, I said, You're correct. I'm done, and don't have to remain. He briefly displayed astonishment, but he soon covered it up with a smile. Excellent. Avoid being struck by the door as you leave. I slammed my door behind me and rushed upstairs. This time, I wasn't going to back down. After grabbing my duffel bag, I began packing. Whether it was inconvenient or late, didn't matter to me. I finished packing my luggage with clothing and necessities. I kept reliving the fight over and over in my mind. How could I have allowed things to reach this stage? What had kept me there for so long? The answers were no longer important. I had a gut feeling that I wouldn't be staying here much longer. I was about to depart when I heard the front door open as I made my way downstairs with my duffel bag. After supper, Mom and Dad returned. What are you doing? Lucas, when Mom saw my backpack. Her once jolly tone turned to one of perplexity. I'm going. Flatly. I replied. What? She moved closer and asked. Why? What took place? Mike entered the room before I could reply, his prior smug look remaining on his face. He leaned against the wall and whispered. He's just being dramatic. Mom's expression became intense. What did you do? Mike, nothing. Defensively, he said. He is exaggerating our small argument to an absurd degree. I couldn't contain my resentful laughter. We had a little dispute. And you told me that if I didn't like it, I should just leave because no one asked me to remain. I am now departing. Mom's voice fell to that quiet, solemn tone she employs when she's attempting to maintain composure as she turned to Mike. You must apologize to your brother. Mike. For what purpose? She sternly reprimanded him for making him feel uncomfortable. Lucas is needed here. It is unfair to drive him away like this when he has been providing a lot of assistance, Dad added, who had remained silent until now. She is correct. It will be much more difficult for all of us if Lucas goes. Mike. You have to put this right. Mike let out a grunt. All right. I'm sorry. In any case, I was incredulous as I stood there looking at them. They didn't ask him to apologize because they wanted me to feel valued or because they cared about me. They wanted me to stay so they could continue to exploit me. Which is why they were asking. It came down to this, after all those months of believing I was supporting my family and hoped we could be getting back in touch. I was only their ticket to eat. Do not bother. Slinging my backpack over my shoulder, I spoke. I'm not staying. Either. And I won't be persuaded by a phony apology. Hold on. Lucas, Mom said as she moved ahead of me. We can resolve this. Just sit down and have a conversation. No. I answered firmly. I'm finished. I'm done. Mom's expression dimmed, and she briefly appeared to be truly distressed. You're being unreasonable, she said, after straightening up. Lucas. We're a family. Exactly. I said. Families support one another. However, that is not the situation at hand. I'm done complying with this one-sided situation. I opened the door after passing her. Whatever it was. I heard Mike mutter as I went outside. He will return. I didn't even try to answer. I simply tossed my bag in the back seat, went outside to my car, and drove away. I crashed at my buddy Jake's house that evening. He made no inquiries at all. Stay as long as you need, he added, giving me a blanket. I felt lighter than I have in months as I lay on his couch. For the first time in a long time. The expectations of my family were not weighing heavily on me. They blew up my phone the next day. As I had anticipated, I didn't care. Though, I was at last beginning to feel normal again a few months after I moved out. I ultimately found my own apartment. But living at my friend Jake's house had been a lifesaver. A tiny yet comfortable place without all the responsibilities of living with my family. Life was quiet, and I was becoming used to my routine. Then one day my mother called. To be honest, I wasn't in the mood for one of her guilt trips, so I didn't pick up right away. However, I later listened to the voicemail she left. Hello, Lucas. This is Mom. All I wanted to do was chat. We truly miss having you around and have been thinking about you. Although we acknowledge that things became tense, we would like to make amends. When you can, give me a call back. I adored you. That ultimately adore you. It seemed so rushed. Miskin Kraft. I thought I should at least listen to her. Though, I gave her a call back because I thought it would be an olive branch. On the first ring, she responded. Her voice was smooth and syrupy. I'm so happy you phoned. Lucas. How are you, okay? I responded warily. What is going on? As she was speaking, she began to call attention to the fact that we didn't treat you fairly while you were residing here. And we are very sorry about it. Not buying it. I responded. We were considering doing something special as a family. You know, to get back in touch and put things right. She said. How do you feel about a lavish family getaway now? I could have been thrilled if this had been someone else. Who doesn't like a good trip? However, I knew better than to believe anything that seemed too wonderful to be true because this was my family. I still went along with it. I'm not sure. I answered. What sort of trip? A vacation in the tropics. Her voice was virtually brimming with excitement as she spoke. Gorgeous beaches and delicious cuisine. Calm down. It will be flawless. A resort in the Bahamas was on our radar. What are your thoughts? I paused. It was alluring. That kind of vacation seemed fantastic. I could really use the break. To be honest. However, my parents weren't known for being honest about things. So this was their situation. All right. I replied warily. Give it some thought. Oh. So lovely. She remarked. Obviously attempting to conceal her excitement. Let us know as soon as possible so we can begin preparing. But take your time. This might not have been as benign as it appeared. My family wanted more than a reunion. They had a desire. And I knew pretty well what it was. Based on the way things had gone in the past. Nevertheless, I thought I would visit their location to hear the entire pitch. It might be amusing. At the very least. I drove to the residence a few days later. Everything appeared to be okay when I arrived. Mom was as enthusiastic as ever as she greeted me at the door. There was no sign of Mike. And Dad was comfortably seated in his recliner. They seemed to be attempting to create the ideal family moment. Mom started her sales pitch as soon as we sat down in the living room. She spoke about how much she missed me. The value of family. And how this journey may give us all a new beginning. She also included a few sentences that were loaded with regret. Such as, we just want to make it up to you, Lucas. And family is all we have. Dad added his typical pragmatic perspective. It's a fantastic chance for us to connect. Lucas. You've been putting in a lot of effort. You deserve some time off. I let them do their thing and remained silent. Nodding now and again. However, as the discussion progressed, it became evident that they were making an excessive effort. Okay. So, how's this going to work? I finally asked. Mom grinned. We reasoned that having you handle the booking would be the most convenient. You can make a reservation when we provide you with all the information. Including dates, preferences, and other specifics. Then we'll immediately reimburse you. Immediately after I raised an eyebrow in question. Naturally. She replied hastily. We just believed that having a single person handle all of the coordination would be easier. I heard the garage door open at that very time. Mike was here. I had no intention of staying. Indeed. I heard them conversing in the kitchen as I was making my way to the door. Mom said we would pledge to reimburse Lucas when he agreed to book everything. But we won't. Mike added a giggle to his voice. In any case, he owes us. Then, as usual, he will go on. That. He has the funds. I was momentarily astonished. But not totally taken aback. Reconnecting was not the point of this. As usual, it was simply another plot to take advantage of me. I started preparing my next step and went without saying goodbye. I would definitely offer them a vacation if they asked me to arrange one. But it wouldn't be the one they had in mind. I was going to reverse the situation this time. Almost instantly, the strategy began to take shape. Although I would agree to arrange the vacation, things weren't going to work out as planned. Let's just say that they were about to discover the consequences of underestimating the man who has been listening the entire time. I contacted my mother when I came home and said, Okay. I'll do it. I'll take care of the reservation if you send me everyone's preferences. She said. Oh. Lucas. Thank you so much. We had faith that you would change. This is going to be really amazing. Okay. So here is the problem. My parents believed they had already won when I consented to arrange the vacation. However, I refused to allow that to occur. Not now. I would give them a prank they would never forget if they tried to fool me. The first priority was to maintain order and normalcy. I had to keep them from thinking I was spying on them. I thus cooperated when my mother began texting me about preferences, dates, and room kinds. Yes. Mom sounds wonderful. I'll take care of it. She even gave me many calls to make sure I was still comfortable making upfront payments. However, I maintained my composure. Yes. No issue. I'll take care of it. I'm sure she felt I was the ideal sucker. Instead of planning a trip for 4, as they had anticipated, I started working as soon as I acquired all of their information, including dates, travel schedules, and preferred rooms. I made a reservation for one. Me? In the Bahamas. I discovered an all-inclusive luxury resort with room service, a private villa, and views of the ocean. The fictitious journey works. I created some quite compelling objections using my technological expertise. For their hotel stays, I developed fictitious schedules, making sure everything appeared authentic. To make it appear even more special, I also included a few extras like a free breakfast and check-in for a very important individual. This is where things improve. Though, I used a travel agency that I knew only permitted modifications to be made by the principal account holder when I booked their flights. In this manner, I could simply click to cancel the flights if or when they discovered the technique. Naturally, I also handed them fictitious tickets with the incorrect departure time printed on them. Lucas, I understand what you're thinking now. Just to play with your family. This is a lot of work. You'd be correct. 2. There was a lot. However, I believed they deserved it after what they had done to me. In addition, I felt good about myself because I was finally advocating for myself. Well worth the effort. When the vacation day finally arrived, I made sure to maintain my composure. That morning, I gave my mother a call to double-check the information. I informed her that your flight departs at 11 a.m. Don't forget to bring the printouts I supplied you. And arrive early for security. When it comes to digital tickets, certain airlines are particular, she exclaimed, her voice brimming with appreciation. Oh. Thank you. Lucas. We can't wait. There will never be a better journey than this one. Through the phone, I could just hear her grinning. In the meanwhile, I had already packed and prepared to go. I made sure to be to the airport well in advance of their arrival, because I had a flight on a different carrier that was scheduled to depart 2 hours earlier. I managed to see Mom's friend by keeping my phone on. We're en route. A text message appears. I replied with a swift, secure, and secure journey. Before switching to airplane mode and boarding my trip, I can't wait to meet you at the resort. The resort exceeded my expectations in every way. Upon arriving at my hotel, I snapped a photo of the vista from my balcony and emailed it to them, along with a message. I hope your journey is going well. The vista was nearly as pleasant as the joy of knowing they had no idea what was coming. Nearly. I knew that until they arrived at the airport, they wouldn't notice anything was off. The departure time on their fictitious tickets was 2 hours later than the actual flight schedule. The plane would be in the air by the time they arrived at the gate. I saw the scenario: Mike standing off to the side, most likely looking on his phone, totally unaware of the drama. Mom frantically waving the phony tickets at the airline employees. And Dad complaining that this is why we don't let Lucas handle things. The finest thing, however, wasn't that. The nicest thing was that they would phone me as soon as they learned the airplane had departed without them. And I'd be prepared when they did. My phone did indeed vibrate an hour or so after their scheduled departure time. Mom was the one. I let it to ring. Then Dad called. I also let that one ring. At last. Mike texted. What the fuck? Dude, the flight is no longer available. I didn't respond for a few minutes. What are you saying? Here I am at the resort. Did you not board the aircraft? It was practically instantaneous. Our tickets aren't functioning. The flight has already departed. They claimed. I typed back with a smile. That's strange. Everything about my flight went smoothly. When I have Wi-Fi, I'll check on it. Prior to resetting my phone to airplane mode, I sent the group chat one final message. The text reads, enjoy your vacation. And it shows me relaxing by the pool, with a drink in hand and sunglasses on. Hold on a minute. This time, I suppose it's just me. Let's toast. I then switched off my phone. The days that followed were wonderful. It was made even better by the fact that I swam 8 amazing meals and relaxed in the sun without receiving any guilt trips or passive-aggressive remarks from those who were stranded at home, trying to find out what went wrong. My last day here is today. Though I know the real pleasure is waiting for me back home. I feel totally rejuvenated. When I come home, I'll give you an update. Chapter 8. 1. Okay. So allow me to share with you what transpired when I returned from my luxurious trip alone. Even while I was aware that the consequences would be tremendous, I didn't anticipate how absurd my family's response would be if you had previously believed that they were manipulating. Simply wait. After the most restful week of my life, I took a plane home. For once, I felt like I was treating myself the way I deserved. And the resort was ideal. However, I noticed them as soon as I arrived at my flat. Yes. Mike and my folks were encamped outside my door as if they were planning an intervention. Mom was enraged. Mike only looked irritated. and Dad was pacing and red-faced. Most likely because this required him to leave his PlayStation. Mom threw herself into the elevator as soon as I got out. "Lucas, how could you have done this to us?" She almost let out a cry. "Like fools. We were standing at the airport. We were unable to use the tickets you provided," Dad added, accusing me with a finger point. "You made us seem foolish in front of everyone. According to the airline employees, the tickets weren't authentic. Are you aware of how that made us appear?" I responded. "Oh, I know exactly how it made you look." As I gently opened my door, I knew they wouldn't leave until they finished their tirade. So I left the door open and went inside. Mike came in last, saying to himself, "That's so stupid." I agreed with him for once. I gestured toward the couch and said, "Sit down." They didn't. Mom chose to stand in the center of the living room with her arms crossed instead. Anger and fury were mixed together on her face. "Lucas, why would you do this?" Her tone changed to that of a disgruntled parent as she questioned. "As a family, we just wanted to spend time with you." I couldn't contain my laughter. "Family, really? Are you referring to the same family who planned to utilize me to cover the entire cost of the trip? The same family who had no intention of repaying me? Remember how I heard you in the kitchen? Don't pretend that this was about getting back in touch." There was utter quiet for a moment, as their faces became pale. Then, being the defensive one, Dad said it was only a miscommunication. "That's not how we meant it." "Oh, really?" Taking out my phone, I said. After tapping the screen many times, I pushed play, and the recording of their chat in the kitchen filled the room. I put my phone on hold and put it back in my pocket. "There is still a miscommunication?" I questioned, staring at my father, like a fish struggling to breathe. Mom opened her mouth, shut it, and then opened it again. At last, she stated that the statement was misconstrued. This time, I laughed more. Taken out of context. "You really stated that you would not reimburse me. How much more clarity is required?" At last Mike, who had been unusually silent, piped out. "All okay. All right. It's not like you can't afford it. But perhaps we were going to let you pay for it. You're doing all right." With my fury boiling, I turned to face him. "Chantal, I apologize. Mike, do I have to pay for your vacations right now? Or is that just true when your parents run out of money and try to save you from whatever mess you've caused this time before?" "Don't," Mom said. "Don't talk to your brother like that." Working diligently, I broke off, raising my voice. "At what time, even though he hasn't had an actual job for years? He constantly has new devices and vacations scheduled. I'm the one busting my ass in the meantime. And you want me to simply give you my money as if it were nothing, no more." Dad attempted to intervene in a more subdued but still patronizing tone. "We're family. Lucas, you shouldn't be revealing our private matters in this manner." The final straw was that, "Do you wish to discuss family?" I spoke in a firm yet piercing tone. Family members don't control one another. A family does not treat one child like a cash machine while allowing the other to get away with it. Just because you're angry, doesn't mean you can suddenly play the family card. This time, I refuse to be used by you. After that, they had little to say. Mom said, "You've changed, Lucas." In an attempt to guilt me one final time. "You've changed from who you were before." "Yes. I have evolved. Until I learn how to advocate for myself," I said. "You're upset because you can't keep me under control anymore." I then motioned for them to go and open the door. Dad remarked, "We're not done talking about this," and left. "Yes. I believe we are." As I closed the door behind them, I answered. The actual repercussions started the next day. My phone began to overflow with texts from common friends and extended relatives, many of which included some variation of taco. "You are so self-centered that you treat your parents that way." It seems that Mom and Dad quickly propagated their version of events. They claim that I played a cruel hoax on them by giving them phony tickets, omitting the fact that they were actually going to defraud me. I'm considering retaliating against them now. I have a plan. When Update 2 is finished, I'll let you folks know. Reddit. Hello once more. The long-awaited update is now here. I made the decision to come clean after my family's mayhem. No more deceit. No more secrets. I reasoned that I should be allowed to share my side of the tale with everyone who would listen. Since my parents were going to share theirs, I needed to correct the record. I took the course of action that any rational person in this day and age would take. I posted it on Facebook. I covered everything in a lengthy, in-depth piece. I began by explaining how my parents gradually transferred all of the financial responsibilities on me after persuading me to return home under the pretense of supporting the family. I explained how they had been taking advantage of me to support my way of life while making me feel as though I wasn't doing enough. I didn't hold back. I explained that I overheard them discussing how they intended to defraud me of the money I paid for the vacation, and that they had no intention of repaying me. Naturally. I also added the portion about my retaliation that everyone was most interested in. Here's where I made the point. Though, I've included the recording, in which Mike and my parents laughed as they laid out their whole plan. I made sure to include a disclaimer at the beginning of the post. I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. Since my parents have been presenting their version of events, I feel it is only right that my friends and family know the reality. Who is at fault is up to you to determine. I waited to see what would happen after hitting post. The response came instantly. The post received dozens of comments and shares in just 1 hour. I was unaware that this was the complete story. And those who had first purchased my parents' sob story quickly started to backtrack. I'm so sorry for judging you. Lucas. One cousin wrote. You were correct to defend yourself. Wow. I always thought your parents favored Mike. But I didn't realize it was this bad, said a family acquaintance, who had known us since we were children. Well done for leaving that terrible environment. I received a note from one of Mom's best friends, who said, I'm shocked that they did this to you. I'm so sorry. I trusted them without hearing your side first. You didn't deserve any of that? As for my parents. Oh. They were outraged. Mom left a series of comments on the post. All versions of, I can't believe you're broadcasting our private family affairs online. You're making us seem bad. Dad's answer was more frightening. He wrote, You better take this down. Lucas. You'll regret it because you're going too far. Neither of them received a response from me. I changed the post instead, adding a brief update at the end. I stand by everything I've stated here. In case you were wondering, no matter how many threats or guilt trips I get, I will not be removing this post. Mike sent me a private message saying, Wow. Dude. Really, but predictably. He mentioned nothing on the post itself. Do you think this is acceptable? I also didn't bother to respond to him. As the aftermath persisted over the following several days, additional family members and friends got in touch. Some of them giving assistance. Some are attempting to mediate. Some said that in order to prevent more strife, I should be the mature one and remove the post. However, I had little interest in dispute resolution at that time. Finally, being free from their influence was something I was interested in. When my parents returned to my flat, it was the tipping point. Mom pleaded with me to clean up this mess. But I stood at the doorway and refused to allow them in this time. You've wrecked our reputation, she cried, tears flowing down her cheeks. Lucas, how could you have done this to us? We are your parents. I told her. You destroyed your own reputation. I simply said the truth. Perhaps instead of criticizing me, you should examine your own behavior closely if that makes you feel embarrassed. I shut the door after saying that. I posted one last thing on Facebook later that day. I would want to express my gratitude to everyone who offered encouragement and good thoughts. For those who believe I overreached myself, I appreciate your viewpoint. But I stand by my choice to tell my family the truth. I'm finished. I have attempted to assist you. I've made an effort to establish limits. I've also made an effort to be the bigger person. You don't value me or my contributions, which is why nothing has worked. From now on, I'm putting my health first. Don't contact, text, or visit my flat. Please. I'm continuing on with my life. And you're not included in that. I then blocked their numbers after they saw my post. I made my Facebook profile private and unfriended them. Now that things are calmer, I've been concentrating on forming bonds with people who genuinely value and care about me. For me, severing ties wasn't the best course of action. It was the sole choice. Sometimes the most self-loving thing you can do is to walk away. I appreciate your patience during this crazy journey. It feels amazing to be free at last.